there's a council in Melbourne that is considering banning outdoor barbecues, as if this city's soul hasn't been crushed enough.
Did you see the stylish?
Welcome to the Young IPA podcast. I'm James. This is Pete.
G'day, folks.
It is episode 181. It is the 18th of August. And pretty big show coming up today. So, last couple of weeks we've been very Victoria focused. It's been what's on everyone's mind. This week we're going to be having a look over the seas at New Zealand. What's going on over there? We're going to be talking about WA as well. And for that we've got Oliver Hartwich, Executive Director of the New Zealand Initiative. We're going to be talking to him about the new Auckland lockdowns and the fact that they have delayed an election, which I think is an extraordinary move. We're also going to be talking to IPA research fellow Dara Macdonald about all the things going on in Western Australia between Clive Palmer and the state government, who've basically just said we don't need the rule of law anymore because we don't like Clive Palmer. We're also going to be looking at Queensland. They try to stop people reporting on corruption and a whole bunch of other things in the show. So, Pete, anything you're looking forward to?
Oh, look, there's a few spooky things going on today, James. I think I'd just like to draw people's attention right at the top to the fact that governments all around Australasia are doing really, really crazy things that they wouldn't have even considered doing a few months ago based on the fact that they've got used to it and they like it.
Well, there we go. So, but there is one story that I know you're quite fired up on about, Pete, that happened over this week, and that was the Johannes Leak cartoon.
That's right, the Johannes Leak cartoon. So now a lot of people would have already seen this, but if you haven't, it is a cartoon, and I'm sure Saul's going to chuck it up on the big screen now for those watching. But if you're listening, it is of Joe Biden, and of course he picked his running mate Kamala Harris. Last week, the cartoon featured in the Australian by Johannes Leak, son of Bill Leak, says it's time to heal a nation divided by racism. And then in the next panel, it has Joe Biden. That was Joe Biden. Then in the next panel, it has Joe Biden saying again, "So I'll hand you over to this little brown girl while I go for a lie down." Now, this, obviously, James, as you can imagine, caused a very large fuss, as these things tend to do. Accusations of racism against Johannes Leak and the Australian newspaper, and anyone who reads the Australian newspaper, and anyone who's ever read the Australian newspaper,
if you've seen it in a newsstand, you are besmirched. You
are part of this problem. And so that criticism came from journos, it came from Tim Soop Pomasani, it came from, obviously, a number of politicians. Well, I've got two takes on this, James, then we can get to you. Firstly, it's just garden variety hypocrisy because Biden has said lots of stuff that's a bit questionable, including these very words, which he tweeted out earlier in the week. He said, "This morning, little girls woke up across the nation, especially black and brown girls, who so often may feel overlooked and undervalued in our society." He goes on. Anyway, so it's using his very words, and secondly, clearly, there's the garden variety hypocrisy, and of course Biden in the past has said if you vote for Trump, you're not black, which is incredibly racist, yet all these people still support him. And in addition to that, there is, of course, James, the broader point, which is surely choosing someone on the basis of their skin colour and their gender, which Biden has done, is the bigger issue and far more racist and sexist than any cartoon.
Couldn't agree more, Pete. So yeah, the Joe Biden tweet that Johannes Leak was parodying was him tweeting, "This morning, little girls woke up across the nation, especially black and brown girls, who so often may feel overlooked and undervalued in our society, potentially seeing themselves in a new way as the stuff of presidents and vice presidents," which even by that own logic meant that the Barack Obama presidency did nothing for anybody. But the point being that if when Biden says it, that's fine, but when Johannes Leak says it, that's racist. Like, if words your friends say sound good, but your enemies saying they sound bad, perhaps you don't actually like those words, which is what I'd say about this one. If you think it's racist when Johannes Leak says it, well, I'm sorry, that it's also racist when Joe Biden says it. I don't think you can have it both ways.
100%. 100%. And as I reckon, it's that warped thing. The thing about, what is it? So the thing about this affirmative action, it's really affirmative action, because he said, I'm going to choose someone who's a woman of colour, is that it actually looks down on the people that you're meant to be helping as well. It's not just, racist to other people who might be going for that job who are getting rejected because of the colour of their skin. It's also a negative for the people who it's meant to be helping. It implies that they can't make it on merit. It's disempowering. It's saying you can't make it unless, I help you. The world's out to get you. To one group of people we say you can do anything, you pursue your dreams, and you can go and achieve anything. And to another group we say, not you. You need my help. So that's very disempowering. Anyway, creates resentment. So that's the broader point for me. As much as everyone's hypocritical in politics, that's great, but it's the broader point for me that really got my goat, I'd say.
The one thing I like about this is that Kevin Rudd has obviously weighed into the fact that News Corp needs to come down, and he's complained as well, which means that at least what's come out of this is that Kevin Rudd has something to do.
Yeah, that's right. It's good.
Yeah, I think that's very important. We keep his mind occupied and keep him feeling productive because we need to look out for him.
He went through a passion. He had a week a couple of months ago where he said he'd had a good week. Is that right?
Fantastic news for him. But,
I believe so.
I just want Kevin Rudd still feeling like he's achieving things. So we're going to move on to another story here. So
yeah,
with the idea of national lockdowns, again, and I'm going to come back to this, the phrase, we're all in this together, continues to show absolutely no meaning to anyone. But the federal government is blocking 3 out of 4 applications for Australians to leave the country when the borders are closed amid concerns they could spread coronavirus when they return home. So the stat here, the Australian Border Force has granted permission for 22,640 citizens and permanent residents to depart Australia from March 25 to July 31 out of 91,950. So 22,000 approximately out of 91,000 have been allowed to leave Australia. Now, this idea that Australia is turning into just one big, stay-at-home prison kind of reinforced when it's the idea that, we literally are stopping you from leaving. You don't have a good enough excuse.
That's right. This is crook as. Like, there's no reason. I get that they don't want to let people in because, they might spread coronavirus, blah, blah, blah. But stopping people leaving? That's creepy as. I mean, that's what North Korea and places like that do. I mean, and it's not for stuff like people want to go to Bali. It's people want to... I saw one of my mates the other day, his mum wanted to come and help them because they were having kids. They were having their first child and the mum couldn't come. People going to weddings and things like that. You've got to be able to leave. That's the deal. You've got to be able to... If you don't like your institutional arrangements, you should be able to leave. And, we've all thought about it. I don't want to live in Melbourne for the next 2 years if it's going to be like this. Does that mean I can't go anywhere?
Believe me, I'd leave for anywhere. But the idea is also, okay, we want to keep people safe from spreading coronavirus when they return home. Now, I thought that's why we had the hotel quarantine set up. So why should someone be stopped from leaving if they can come home and spend 2 weeks in hotel quarantine?
Yeah, no, exactly right. If they want to come back, then it's perfectly fine for the government to say, okay, well, you've been overseas, you're going to have to do X, Y, Z, that's fine. But stopping people from leaving, Dave Sharma, mate of the show, said there's no other country that I'm aware of that is imposing an exit permit system like we've got in Australia. So it's not like other countries are doing it, according to our mate Dave Sharma. And yeah, I mean, it's a fundamental right of a free country to be able to opt out. Yeah. And the other idea that I want to come back to is the idea that we're all in this together. Now, Pete, I'm going to have a go at one of your sacred cows here. But the fact that Shane Warne can fly over to the UK to commentate cricket, but some people are stopped from seeing the birth of their children or from attending their children's weddings, that to me is a bit, well, if you know a guy. Well, exactly. And I don't mind you having a go at Shane Warne on this one, James, because he's in the UK at the moment. I don't know when he went there, though. Has he been there for...
Unless he's been there for 5 months, I think this kind of falls in the purview of this issue.
Yeah.
Which is extraordinary forward planning. If Shane Warne went ahead 5 months going, this is how long the lockdown is going to be.
Mate,
and I would have liked Shane Warne to bring that expertise and forward thinking to the national cabinet rather than the Channel 9 cricket commentary team.
Yeah, he could have told us what was going to happen. But no, you're exactly right. How do they choose the 22,000 out of 90,000? Oh, if you're Warney and you want to talk about how Pakistan are losing once again... then I'm pretty bitter on touring teams of the Poms at the moment because, as you know, we've had nothing on. So I've been watching a lot of English cricket with Warney, barracking for the touring team. West Indies and Pakistan both let me down, in case anyone was wondering about that.
I'll update the record. So we'll put that in show notes. We'll address this next week. We'll have a round table. We'll get a few
the
cricket
promo.
Yeah.
That's the promo done.
All right, so I'll move on to another story here. So this one, can I lead this, Pete? Because this one is just something I am absolutely incredulous about. So
yeah, no, you go for it, mate.
The Queensland government literally tried to stop people from reporting on corruption. Like, that's where we're at right now.
Specifically during an election.
Specifically during an election. So they proposed this bill 24 hours, they dished it 24 hours later, but they propose a bill that journalists would have had to face 6 months of jail or a fine if they reported on corruption allegations made to the Crime and Corruption Commission during election periods. Now, I would think that is the number one time to report those kind of things, but Queensland government say, okay, you can't do it because that would be mean.
Well, this is what I talked about at the top of the show, James. Every government has got a taste of doing stuff they never dream of doing, and now they can't stop. And the thing about this was, so they did it, and then 24 hours later they backflipped and said, "Oh no, we're not going to do it." Like the normal processes of discussing the pros and cons of certain stuff is just out the window. People are just going rogue, writing up laws, blah 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 blah.
Yeah, I like the idea that it was also like, "Oh, we thought you guys would like it. Oh, if you hate it, we'll get rid of it."
Yeah. Oh, sorry, didn't see that coming. It's
But
also,
in the back down, so Premier Palaszczuk in the back down says that it was a recommendation from the Crime and Corruption Commission. This was not a government recommendation. It was a recommendation that came from the Crime and Corruption Commission. It's like, oh, that makes it so much better. Like, oh, I thought, she knows which one is the democratically elected body, right? She knows which one that the Queensland people have trusted to make these decisions for them. It's like, well, I didn't want to make sure that corruption reporting was a crime, but this other body, they really made a good point, and I just wasn't paying enough attention. Like, that seems an extraordinary excuse.
They forced me. I don't know. I would like to talk to one of our very learned research fellows about what exact role that Crime and Corruption Commission plays, because it feels like it's a bit of a, in itself, might be a bit of a political stunt to have this Crime and Corruption Commission, but then for them to complain that they get an upswing in applications to the Crime and Corruption Commission during election times, because of course both sides are trying to smear each other, and a very small number of those actually end up being true or whatever, is like, oh, we don't want to do work, we just want to earn our money. What was my other thing about this? Oh yeah, so this is the government that banned school to send a message. Let's not forget that in Queensland they banned primary school, and then the top health bureaucrat let it slip that it's because we wanted to send a message. So they've got form on wacky stuff, and at least they didn't do it. So one positive. Find the positives.
All right, now we're going to be talking about Western Australia with Dara later in the show, but we just want to bring it up top just so we all know what's going on. So Pete, what is going on?
Well, Terry McCrandy of the Oz called this the most outrageous abuse of power we have seen from any government in Australia in the past, in 120 years since Federation, or 5 minutes ago when Daniel Andrews put us all under house arrest. But this fits in with my whole theme of every government in Australia just going nuts. What they did was, Clive Palmer and the Western Australian government are in a legal battle over a mine, which has been going since 2012. And it sort of became apparent that Palmer was going to win, and that the figure bandied around is that my computer's just updating, that's great. The figure bandied around was that the Western Australian government was going to owe Palmer north of $30 billion, which is their annual budget. So it's going to be a fair blow to Western Australia. So what they did was they put through a piece of legislation with bipartisan support, I might add, which means that Palmer and his company can't make any claims under the legislation. Agents of the government are given legal immunity, and it's retrospectively dated, James, which is very convenient for the Western Australian government, which means that effectively Palmer can't rinse the Western Australian government. Now, obviously, he's going to take this to the High Court, but yeah, that's what happened. I don't want to get into too much into it because we talked to Dara about it, but insane.
Yeah, it does seem like the political equivalent of, well, my dad can beat up your dad. It's like, well, just because you think you're entitled to money, we're now going to make it illegal for you to ask.
Yeah. Specifically you.
Specifically Clive Palmer.
Because he's not normal. We get into that in the interview, but yeah, because he's not normal. And it was done after, business hours had finished over in the east, which is, I feel like, a bit of a Western Australian thing. I've heard rumours that like Friday afternoon in corporate Western Australia is pretty awesome because all the head offices in Sydney have closed. So, head down to the Cot. Is that a pub? No, it's a beach, isn't it? Head down to the Subi Hotel. Anyway, that's what
for
Western
people
Australia
only listening, Peter's eyes have completely dilated at the thought of clocking off early in a foreign land, hypothetically for beers.
Oh, and Western Australia, like looking over the Indian Ocean, I mean, that is nothing better. I wouldn't mind getting involved in that on some stage.
I think we've got sidetracked here, but like the last thing I want to bring up with...
A little bit sidetracked.
Yeah, the last thing I want to bring up with this one is like this is some highlighted text from the bill that is being put together in Western Australia, and this is extraordinary stuff. The rules known as the rules of natural justice, in brackets including any duty of procedural fairness, end brackets, do not apply to or in relation to any conduct of the state that is or is connected with a disputed matter. So like the concept of natural justice, meh.
I like that they've been specific about it.
Like, they've literally got it in where it's like, oh, yeah, no, we don't care.
It's not like they've got
we know
around
this
that.
is not cool, but we don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, we're specifically, like, so we're going to do the whole thing, and then in addition to that, rule of law no longer counts, just in case you missed that.
Yeah.
So pretty amazing stuff. Dara knows.
As we get into with Dara, I mean, you don't have to love Clive Palmer to get up in arms about this. If you're any other business in Western Australia, you'd be like, wait, so if we get into a serious enough issue with the government, that's their like, two keys in the ignition box break in case of emergency plan is to destroy the natural justice and make it illegal for us to go to the court.
Yeah. Oh, that's the thing. Like, Clive Palmer's rich and it probably doesn't matter that much to him, although $30 billion in anyone's language is a fair bit. But it's the other businesses and businesses coming from overseas as well who would lack the confidence of investing in WA.
All right, we're going to keep moving because we've got a lot to get through and it's a long show. So over in New Zealand, again, we're going to be talking about this with Oliver Hartwich later in the show. But New Zealand on Monday said it was going to postpone its national election by 4 weeks to October 17 as new coronavirus cases are found in Auckland. And the country that once was the envy of the world for eliminating coronavirus, apparently you can't eliminate a virus. So that is now back in the community. And it's just a big warning to the rest of the world. Elimination strategies only sometimes work and only temporarily work. Yeah,
it's like if New Zealand can't do it, who's got a chance of doing it? They're so isolated, no offence, and they're not that densely populated. You know, I think there's only the same amount of people as there is in Melbourne in New Zealand. And it's like you're just going to be in and out of this stuff until the vaccine comes, which may never come. So, not a good week for those who think elimination is a good thing, in my view.
Yeah, and then suspending an election just because Auckland is in lockdown. I mean, we get into this a little bit with Oliver Hartwich, probably not as much as I would have liked. But anyway, the fact is that the point being that they're saying, okay, we can't do an election because it wouldn't be fair because the opposition can't get in front of cameras because we're putting policies out. But social media exists. The opposition is still consulted in Australia, probably not as much as it should be. But, like, I don't know. The idea that, okay, just because this is a crisis, you're stuck with me, maybe even if you don't think that I'm doing the best job as a leader, sorry, it's just too much of a risk. I think that's a very important time to have an election. Could you imagine if Trump in America was just like, oh, you know what, we're just going to do it next year because it's just a bit tricky at the moment.
Well, he did.
Like, there'd be riots in the street.
He suggested delaying it and everyone went nuts, and then Jacinda Ardern said, oh, yeah, we're delaying it. Everyone's like, good move.
Seems like the right way to keep people safe.
Yeah, so, no, there's definitely that double standard. And we, of course, get into, with Oliver, a few of the different treatments that Jacinda Ardern gets from the media, which is a very interesting part of the interview.
All right, so let's move on to heroes and villains. This is a Grunt the Pig Freedom Snort for people that
I would like to raise something before we get on to heroes and villains.
Okay.
And that is that to listeners of the Young IPA podcast, your boy James Bolt was published in Spiked.
Heroes and villains.
Today, I believe. Now, Spiked, of course, we talk about Spiked all the time. You'll know what it is, but it's the online magazine edited by the great Brendan O'Neill. James Bolt in it this week. I'm a bit jealous, to be honest. Now, what was it called? It was called Melbourne Slide into COVID Dystopia. It was Hemingway in parts, to be honest. My favourite bit, politicians and tens of thousands of public servants in Victoria have seen their pay increase, but we're all in this together. The elite stay in their jobs and lecture the rest of us on how to balance public policy priorities. And the final bit of the article, and you've got to check it out, the final bit of the article describes a woman talking on a mobile phone without her mask. And it sounded like, and I don't know who wrote it, when that bloke or woman, can't remember who it is, described the lights going off across Europe just before World War I. It sent a shiver down my spine. Check it out.
Heroes and villains this week.
Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yes, I know what you're talking about. I don't.
Who am I talking about?
I don't do well with compliments. I'm uncomfortable. If you could frame it as an insult, I'd know much better how to work with it.
Who is the person I'm talking about?
I can't remember, but Mark Stein used it in a book, and I don't know. There's a bunch of people just furiously pounding the wheels of their car right now and trying to get us to say the name. But apologies. And heroes and villains this week. This is a Grunt the Pig Freedom Snort for people that have stood up for liberty around the world. Pete, who is your hero of the week?
So that was British Foreign Secretary Sir Edward Grey. Just Googled it. The internet's an amazing thing.
Is that your hero?
No, that was... he's one of my heroes. But my actual hero this week is Nick Cave. Now, we tried to get Nick Cave on the program. Difficult to get hold of him because he's a world-famous rock star. Anyway, he had a piece on his website during the week about cancel culture. We've talked about his attitudes towards cancel culture before, where he's been critical of it on his website. He's done it again. He wrote... And it's obviously, he's a beautiful artist, right? Like it was a beautifully written piece. You know, me and James sort of were having on about cancel culture, but Nick Cave does it with a bit more panache. Anyway, he said, as far as I can see, cancel culture is mercy's antithesis. Political correctness has grown to become the unhappiest religion in the world. It now embodies all the worst aspects that religion has to offer and none of the beauty. It has become quite literally bad religion run amok. Now, he talks about, obviously, creativity needing mercy and needing room to breathe. The idea that you can be forgiven for making mistakes has gone out the window. It's good to see an artist, James, actually blow up a few of society's sacred cows, because that's what artists are for, after all. And we seem to have lost that idea. A lot of artists want to do that thing that you talk about with comedians getting applause instead of laughs. What's that called again?
Clapter is the phrase.
Right.
Yeah, Nick Cave's been good on this for a while. He's done, this isn't the first time we brought up the fact that he's not a big fan of cancel culture, which is always good to see.
Yeah.
And for like a rock star that has lived his life sort of on that, he doesn't mind pushing a few boundaries. He doesn't mind looking like the beatnik punk. Like, I didn't think he would be a big fan of cancel culture, so it's good to see him publicly come out against it.
And he also, another final point which he thought was good, he said he talks about the origins of political correctness, which I think is a good point, because people forget that political correctness started out as being, don't be racist. Don't call people, racial slurs. And that was a good thing. And now it's gone into treat people differently according to their race instead of don't treat people differently according to their race. Anyway, there you go. Great stuff. Fan of Nick Cave, James?
Definitely fan of Red Right Hand, because I do like Peaky Blinders.
That song is feels like it's been written for Peaky Blinders. Like, it's amazing.
Yeah, you ever walk down to the street late at night listening to that song in your headphones? Great experience. You feel very cool.
You feel like, what's that guy's name? Thomas Shelby. Anyway, go on, your turn.
All right, my one this week. So similar to Nick Cave in someone standing up for cancel culture, but this is like the cancel culture in that, okay, you'd actually go to prison for it. So something that I think we've talked about on the show before. So Scotland's got this new hate speech law, which would make it illegal for people to stir up hatred against someone else, but they don't even need to prove intent. So some of the stories that have come out is that if a play was sufficiently, if someone felt victimized by a play they were watching, the actors in the play could be found guilty under this law. So this week, over 20 individuals and organisations from the world of arts, journalism, literature, comedy, all that, signed an open letter just saying we need to get rid of this law. This is absolutely ridiculous. Hate speech laws at the best of times are questionable with stuff that would actually criminalise actors performing in a play. I mean, come on. And one of them was Rowan Atkinson. So Rowan Atkinson's my hero of the week. I mean, hopefully by now you would have seen Rowan Atkinson's famous speech standing up for free speech against I can't remember which law it was, but Google Rowan Atkinson free speech. It's this awesome 12-minute speech about just how important free speech is, how important it is that artists be allowed to say whatever they want to critique society. And yeah, it's just cool to see another, one of an industry overtaken by political correctness stand up against some of the worst parts of that.
Fantastic. That's all we asked for. Now, any other famous people on that list, James?
None that I recognise, to be honest. It seemed very like the British playwright scene, which, living in Melbourne, I'm not entirely across, but it was good to see Rowan Atkinson there.
I would love to get asked to sign an open letter. That's when you know you've made it. Not like a petition on the street. Like, I mean, a proper open letter where your name gives it extra gravitas. That's the aim for us, James. Your article at Spiked is going to help.
Yeah, just break into Washington, D.C. and sign the Declaration of Independence. I mean, that's a pretty good one.
Yeah, well, Saul, write that down. All right,
John
now.
Hancock, Thomas Jefferson, Peter Gregory, the roof seal.
Well, I do agree with it. Anyway, villains. Extinction Rebellion fake nudity run. Roll the tape, Saul.
As Extinction Rebellion protests enter their 6th day.
That is the fake nudity run. So we give anyone who is a villain and fighting against the cause of freedom, we call them the Extinction Rebellion fake nudity run award. James, who's your villain this week?
This one's been going on for a while, but I've only just seen it. But it's this, they're actually trying to bring back segregation in the UK. It's incredible.
Cool.
It's this thing called Free Black University, which is this initiative. It's a Kickstarter. It's got £107,000 on their Kickstarter at the moment, or their GoFundMe, sorry. But it's the idea that they're going to create a university solely for black people, which I think was what they were trying to do in Alabama in the 1960s. But the fact that it's come back in vogue is like, hang on, are we seeing what we're doing here? Is this really the way we want to go?
Well, what supremacists will be happy?
Exactly.
So you mentioned, James, this is a Kickstarter. It's not government funded yet, is that right?
No, it's not. It's the GoFundMe has £107,000. Like, it's not government funded yet, but the fact that it even exists and is that popular, like, again, the ideas that were prevalent with George Wallace all those years ago, these firebrand racists, they're back in vogue in Britain.
Yeah, no, terrible stuff. And you would hope that eventually, because some politician will see that and go, "Oh, that's a good idea," and try and kick some money in. So it's good that hasn't happened yet, but we'll keep an eye on that. Have you got any more on that, James?
No, that's it. Let's hear your one.
Well, this is vastly worse, James, than segregation, and that is that there's a council in Melbourne that is considering banning outdoor barbecues, as if this city's soul hasn't been crushed enough. The Bayside Council has put out a survey on changes. So what they do is they put out this thing, right, where here's like 7 or 8 ideas that we've got. Tell us if you like one. And the reason they put out banning outdoor barbecues, hang on, let me get this exactly right. A ban on the burning of solid fuel, e.g. wood and charcoal, for outdoor cooking or heating due to offensive emissions. So this is if other people could smell your barbecue and the smell isn't nice, which a barbecue usually is.
Always is. Name one thing that doesn't smell good when it's being barbecued.
Oh, just if it's set on fire and it's starting to smell like smoke. But yeah, no, I take your point in general. But the Bayside City Council are considering banning it because, so they put out these 8 ideas. Now, this idea, James, has received, they got a petition for it in 2018. Do you know how many signatures it had?
To ban barbecues?
Yep.
4.
It had 5. Very close.
So
had
close.
5. And they say
that's a good cross-section of the community.
Oh,
that's a democratic will of the people.
I know the exact kind of people that would be signing that, and it's the kind of people that hassle us down at the cricket club about getting our liquor licence, and it drives me insane. Anyway, so there's that, and they receive a whopping 3 complaints a year about these barbecues, James. And I thought that the bloke from the council would pour cold water on it and say, "We're not going to do it, don't worry. This is just part of the democratic process." But no, City Council's Mayor Clark Martin said he knew the suggested change to backyard barbecues would be divisive. It is, Clark. For someone who is having a romantic evening by the fire, it's beautiful for them. Don't be creepy, Clark. But if the smoke is coming across and affecting 20 units down the road, then it's a problem.
Yeah, it's like, Clark, we were discussing barbecues over here.
Yeah, what do you mean?
Let's keep us looking down the straight and narrow, all right?
Not many barbecues are romantic. Normally they're sort of, with mates, settle down, Clark. But, as if this, let's make sure no one anywhere experiences any joy in this city ever again, because that would be a tragedy. We better ban barbecues. Clark Martin, get your hand off it. This is rubbish. Villain of the week.
I have nothing more possibly to add to that. All right, that is it for the start of the show. We'll now go to our interviews with Oliver Hartwich and Dara Macdonald. Okay, we now welcome back onto the show Oliver Hartwich from the New Zealand Initiative. Oliver, welcome back.
Hi, good to be with you.
Oliver, Auckland has moved to another lockdown after about 30 up to 50 cases now, months after the last coronavirus community transmission case. Now, what is the mood in New Zealand about this all?
Well, we're obviously very disappointed because we thought we had the virus under control, but now it's back and Auckland is in lockdown, level 3, not quite as extreme as the lockdown we had initially, but our level 3 is still very strict. And of course, for the rest of the country, level 2 is also a minor infringement on our normal movements. So the virus is back, and it really disappoints a lot of New Zealanders who would really, perhaps naively, believe that we could get this under control.
So, Oliver, what does this show about elimination strategies? Because New Zealand is held up as an example over here in Australia as a place where elimination worked. And if we had done what New Zealand did, we'd be right. Now, does this show now, allegedly they think it might have come from trade with Melbourne. Does that mean that the only way to truly eliminate the virus is banning global trade?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it depends on who you ask. There are still enough people in New Zealand, including some in our office here at the New Zealand Initiative, who believe that elimination, at least temporarily, is possible, provided, of course, that you protect the borders properly, because actually I don't think it came through goods imports. It probably came somehow through our normal quarantine system. However, I think more long-term, it is very unlikely that New Zealand will be able to continue its elimination strategy, because it will take too long until the rest of the world has actually moved to a stage where we think we could safely interact with them again. So I think this elimination strategy at some stage in the future will be questioned, even in New Zealand.
It does strike me that any elimination strategy is just tied to whether or not we get a vaccine. And I just wonder, like, you say you've got some staff members who believe an elimination is possible, but surely even with an elimination policy, New Zealand is just completely on its own from the rest of the world, from travel and all these trade restrictions, just until a vaccine exists.
That's right. Actually, I think elimination strategy, that might be possible if we were able to manage our borders properly, but I don't really trust the government to do that well, because we have actually seen too many blunders at the border in the last few months. I don't think our government is capable of doing that. The other thing is, even if the government were perfectly capable of running the border, which it isn't, there would still be possibility for human error. So the virus might still come into New Zealand, and then what do we do then? Should we lock down each time we have a few cases somewhere in Auckland? I don't think that's practical. And finally, the virus and the vaccine. Well, I just heard today that some researchers believe that if we are very lucky, we might get a vaccine in the next 4 years. Not this year, not next, in 4 years. I don't think New Zealand can actually cut itself off from the world for 4 years, pursuing an elimination strategy, which it can't really manage, only to get the virus in 2023 or 2024. I don't think it's going to work that way.
So, Oliver, you're obviously clearly a bit sceptical of the elimination policy of the New Zealand government. What should the New Zealand government be doing, do you think, and what should other governments like Australia be doing, in your opinion?
Well, I think it is inevitable at some stage that we will have to learn to live with the virus, both in Australia and in New Zealand. And I don't say that lightly. I don't really want to live with the virus. It's actually much nicer without. But if the rest of the world doesn't get the virus situation under control, and if at some stage we want to interact with the rest of the world again, we will probably have to live with it. The other thing I say, which encourages me a bit, is the Swedish experience, of course, because maybe we underestimated the level of immunity already present in the population before we encountered coronavirus. So what we are now seeing is, of course, the importance of T cells, so an acquired level of immunity to the novel coronavirus from previous infections with other coronaviruses. And therefore, there might be a chance, as we can see in Sweden, that we reach herd immunity a lot faster than we previously thought. If that's the case, the rest of the world will probably get towards this herd immunity sometime over the next year or so. And then it would probably be a good time for New Zealand also to question its own elimination strategy, except at that time, New Zealand will probably go through the kinds of infection waves that Europe and North America are currently going through.
Yeah, I completely agree. Now, it all comes because for so long, New Zealand has been seen as the best way to handle coronavirus. I mean, it was the envy of the world. It was internationally renowned that New Zealand was the only country in the world to completely cut itself off from coronavirus and keep its citizens safe. And then this happened. So one of the claims that I want to highlight is that on 10th of August, so this time last week, the ABC News here in Australia tweeted, New Zealand has stamped out coronavirus, so what sets it apart from the rest of the world? So Oliver, what does separate New Zealand from the rest of the world?
Well, I think the one thing that New Zealand and the New Zealand government did well was communications. The PR strategy of our government was world class. The way that the Prime Minister actually led New Zealand through the crisis, whether you agree with her strategy or not, it was just fantastically done, and the approval ratings actually demonstrate how well she did that job. Even if you don't agree with the strategy, it is hard not to be impressed by the way that she handles these press conferences, our Prime Minister. Apart from that, apart from PR strategy, which, as I say, was world-class, the strategy and the execution were definitely lacking. The government has not been at all good when it comes to execution. They were also less than forthcoming with the truth when it comes to the availability of PPE, test kits, and the like, or even flu vaccinations. So I think anything that had to do with strategy, the government actually didn't show great acumen there. And anything to do with implementation and execution of that strategy, we saw a lot of mistakes being made there as well. So the only thing I think that the rest of the world can probably learn from this government is communications and PR.
That's interesting because we'll talk more about Jacinda Ardern in a minute, but the communication is important because over here in Victoria, where we're located, it was all about flatten the curve, and even in the rest of Australia, it was about flatten the curve. Now, it's not clear what the actual policy is, if it's about flattening the curve or if it's about elimination. So, and that's a big thing for people, to just not be told what the strategy is, to be sitting in lockdown and not know what's going on. So credit to Jacinda Ardern for actually giving her policy a name and communicating it to the New Zealand people now.
But actually on that, initially, of course, our government wanted to flatten the curve as well. If you go back to the newspaper archives in mid-March, you can see that our government actually said we wanted to just avoid the overwhelming of our hospital system, and they wanted to flatten the curve, suppress it enough so that New Zealand could live with it. And then over the space of just about 5 days, the government changed tune several times until they got themselves into elimination mode. That was almost a fluke. It wasn't really what the government had initially planned.
Well, there you go. So let's move on to the economy of New Zealand, because that's an issue that your organisation, the New Zealand Initiative, talks about a lot. What is it? What are the challenges for New Zealand economically, and what kind of policies do you see looking forward to help New Zealand recover from this thing?
Well, it is obviously very difficult for New Zealand to survive on its own, cut off from the rest of the world, especially since we had two industries before COVID-19 which generated a lot of income for us. And one of them was international students, both secondary and tertiary students, spending time in New Zealand and studying at New Zealand's secondary schools and universities. So that sector is basically gone. And the other big sector for New Zealand, of course, is tourism. And we had a lot of international tourism, not just domestic tourism. And until we get that back, there will be a massive hole in the New Zealand economy, and we will struggle. So it is important for us to reopen the borders at some stage.
Another thing that's coming out in New Zealand this week is that Jacinda Ardern has delayed the election by 4 weeks. Now, I think this is an extraordinary move. I can't believe democracy is treated like a health hazard. I would have taken any measure possible to make sure that an election was held on the day that it was agreed an election would be held. So how is this justified? Because only Auckland seems to be in the tough lockdowns. As you say, there's still stage 2 in the rest of New Zealand, but Auckland, the one city with stage 3, how do you get to delay an election off that?
I think it was absolutely the right call to delay the election. And actually, if you ask me, I would have probably delayed it even more. I understand the concerns about democracy, but the problem is actually you can't have a properly democratic election if you can't campaign. The government is currently occupying the airwaves. The government has daily press conferences, sometimes several times a day. So you constantly see the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance, the Health Minister on TV explaining their policies. You don't see anything of the opposition, and they can't even campaign anymore. So you can't have a free and fair election in these circumstances. And so delaying the election was the only right and responsible thing to do, especially if you care for democracy. Actually, I would have delayed the elections even further, because seriously, the election now has made it so much more difficult to come to reasonable policy decisions now, because we were constantly looking at the election date, and every really important decision, for example, on how to safely reopen the border, was basically made impossible by having this election date hanging in front of us. So I think now moving the election just a month to October probably makes matters a little bit worse for that, because there's still a short-term election effect and nothing gets done until then. It would have been a lot better had we shifted the election to some time in late 2021, because at least it would have given us some breathing space to do some sensible policies, even if they were not popular, which we can't do now. So in a way, this is a half-hearted solution, but I agree at least that it makes sense to delay the election while the parties can't campaign.
How are the polls going over there, Oliver? Is Jacinda Ardern likely to get re-elected? Will this outbreak and the delay of the election have a negative impact for her?
We'll see. The last opinion polls we had were, of course, before the new Auckland lockdown. We had Labour up to 60.9% in the polls. And even in the latest poll, it was still well into the 50s. So according to the last opinion polls, we had Labour could govern on its own, which is remarkable given that we are operating in a mixed member proportional environment, so MMP electoral system, which typically leads to coalition governments. Whether this new lockdown will actually hurt Jacinda Ardern, it's too early to tell. The funny thing is, even though this was probably due to a border blunder and a quarantine blunder, Jacinda is still handling the PR so well that she is able to convince the public that she's doing all the right things for the country. And again, in crises, we see the population gather behind their leaders, and that's exactly the same effect we're seeing again today.
One thing that might be helping her PR, at least here in Australia, is the fact that every single member of the media seems to be absolutely in love with her. So is this also something that happens in New Zealand? Is there just a great groundswell from the journalists that she's just the best world leader in the world?
Yes, we're getting a lot of these stories, and each time a story like this appears in the international media, of course, that gets reported here. So sometimes you wonder whether these stories about Jacinda Ardern being published, say, in the New York Times or in the British press, actually get read over there or more over right here, because New Zealand is like nothing more than international recognition. And every time the Prime Minister gets a glowing story elsewhere, you can be sure this will be discussed and reported here. So yes, she has a remarkably stellar image overseas, but certainly also in New Zealand.
Yeah, it's definitely something that makes us a little bit depressed. You know, we see Donald Trump says we're going to delay the election and, you know, it's the end of democracy and we have to storm the barricades. Jacinda Ardern does it and it's like, yeah, good move. And, you know, we saw things like her banning foreigners from buying property in New Zealand. That would be a huge issue if, you know, a Conservative leader did that. But when Jacinda Ardern does it, it's fine. Now, how would you rate her performance overall? Would you say that she's been a good leader, bad leader? What are your thoughts there?
Well, it's a mixed picture. She does crisis very well. So she handled the Canterbury terror attacks extremely well. She found the right words. She brought the nation together. She did the White Island volcano eruption very well, another national disaster. And now she is a master when it comes to communicating her measures in COVID, whether you agree with them or not. So in crisis mode, Jacinda Ardern, well, you can't beat her there. Everything else her government has touched actually didn't work. So she promised to build 100,000 new homes and gave up on that program, and it became clear that it was unworkable. She promised to build a light rail line from Auckland Airport to the CBD. I think that was the wrong call anyway, but she gave up after 3 years because that scheme didn't work either. She promised to reduce child poverty in New Zealand. She actually made herself the Minister for Child Poverty Reduction. Didn't work. The relevant indicators actually going up. So basically every area of policy that she touched, apart from these crises, hasn't really worked. So if it had just been on her record as a manager of ordinary government business, I think the opposition would stand a chance to win this election.
Oliver Hartwich, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, guys.
Okay, we now welcome back onto the show one of the very good friends of the Young IPA podcast and quiz stalwart, Dara Macdonald. Welcome back.
Great to be back.
All right, Dara, so Terry McCrann wrote in The Australian on Friday that Mark McGowan has embarked on the most outrageous abuse of power we have seen from any government in Australia in the 120 years since Federation. Now, he's talking about the WA stoush with Clive Palmer, which has now reached legislative responses. So can you break down what exactly is going on?
Well, so Clive Palmer and the WA government have a history, shall we say, of litigation between each other around this mine called the Balmoral iron ore mine. And there has been a number of decisions relating to this mine previously. So there's been a Supreme Court case which Clive Palmer has previously won, and now they've gone into another round of litigation. But the problem with this litigation is that it was released as a supposed figure that the damages that Clive Palmer would win would be up in the $30 billion range. So instead of fighting this legal action, the Parliament, and particularly McGowan, has decided that they're not going to go through the courts, they're going to go through the legislative process instead and try and bar any kind of legal action that could be possibly come out of this particular mine. So the first thing to start off with is the process was completely faulty. They had 48 hours to debate this legislation. So it was completely rushed through the Parliament, and for some reason got a majority. I'm not sure who's voting for this majority, but anyway. And then it was whisked up in the dead of night to get royal assent. And speaking on the particular bill, the Attorney General said that he would not pursue any kind of parliamentary inquiry, and referred to the parliamentary inquiry that was proposed in order to review the legislation as namby-pamby. So it was, first of all, a completely rushed process. There was no checks or balances to ensure that the legislation was properly debated and reviewed. The obvious and other problem that comes up is that it flies completely in the face of the rule of law, so it indemnifies and prevents any kind of legal action against the state, WA, or any of the arms of the state. And this also is retrospective. So every previous claim that Clive Palmer had is now reneged upon. So it's a retrospective law, basically. It's against the rule of law. It's retrospective. It's against the separation of powers because the parliament, or specifically the state, is trying to legislate themselves out of court processes. It's directly mentions that natural justice doesn't apply in regards to Clive Palmer and his company. So there's no right to remain silent. There's no, due process. And obviously this sets a terrible precedent. I mean, they say, oh, it was, the comment that was put forward that legitimizes this move is that it's such an absolutely incredible situation that we have to legislate. And of course it won't create a precedent because Clive Palmer is an unordinary individual. But obviously this does create a precedent if they're going to, hunt down people and persecute people in legislation in this way. There's no saying that it won't happen to you too. So it just creates a completely a completely terrible precedent for anyone who ever wants to do business in the in WA going forward. So it's completely crazy.
So you're right, Dara, it is completely crazy. So just to summarise, the WA government is involved in a court case with Clive Palmer that they don't reckon they're going to win. So they've introduced legislation which means that Clive Palmer and his company can't make any claims under the legislation. Agents of the government are given legal immunity and it's retrospectively dated. Has anything ever happened like that in the history of Australia before? Because that just seems incredible.
No, it's a completely... It's a completely different piece of legislation to what we've ever seen before, even to the extent of, for instance, there was a discussion about retrospective war crimes, whether we can put, this is like the most harshest, the most significant crimes possible that you can imagine, like genocide and so on. And they decided, that you can't impose these crimes retrospectively. So if you can't impose war crimes retrospectively, how the hell are you supposed to impose like contractual, renege on contractual obligations and be indemnified for that retrospectively? It's completely outrageous.
Yeah, I can't say I have a whole lot of sympathy in my heart for Clive Palmer or, any love at all. But the idea that the end of his legal battle with WA just comes through, well, we just got together, we signed a document and we say what we did was fine and you can't complain. That is absolutely outrageous. Does Clive Palmer have anything he can do right now? Because he can front a one-man media campaign, which I'm sure is currently in the works. But as far as he feels entitled to some money. Is there anything he can do from this point to get something, or at least have his day in court so he can feel that there was like a just solution?
Yeah, there's good cause for him to take this piece of legislation through the courts, and particularly the High Court, which undoubtedly he will do. We've got this odd situation where the WA are trying to get out of litigation by passing a law, and Clive Palmer is going to try and get out of legislation by litigation. So, and the only casualties in this really, Clive Palmer is a casualty, but as you said, maybe there's, you have limited. He's not the most savoury of characters. Not that it should matter when it comes to the rule of law, but is ultimately the people of WA that will be paying for this legislation either way. If Clive Palmer loses and the battle goes through the courts, and then he wins this $30 million worth of taxpayers' money, and then on the other hand, if Clive Palmer loses, the precedent that is set by having legislation that completely reneges on principles of natural justice and the rule of law. It's a completely errant principle that the people of WA will lose either way.
So where's the WA Liberal Party on this? This is meant to be the party of private property, the rule of law. Yet they just signed off on this as well. Has there been any opposition to them from this decision?
Well, there's been a few peeps, but outrageously, this passed with the majority in the Parliament with very little debate in 48 hours. I mean, where were they then if they're going to start saying, peeping up now and saying, oh, maybe we should have thought more about this decision. But no, it's already passed. It's already legislation with royal assent. There's been very limited debate, really.
I would say in their defence, a few peeps is much more than many other Liberal parties around Australia have done in support of our basic civil liberties over the last decade. So, credit to the WA government for just making a few peeps. Now, the McGowan government also insists that this whole case is just a one-off. It's just us v. Clive Palmer. We're never going to use this again. And the immortal quote, it is justified because Mr. Palmer is, quote, not normal. Now, again, no one's disputing that last part, but the fact that this law exists remains that someone somewhere can one day use it unless it's repealed. Maybe not this government, maybe a government in future, maybe a government 20 years from now if this law remains. So therefore, we can't say it's a once-off, and we can't take them at their word that this is like the anti-Clive Palmer law. What are the ramifications for other business people in WA who are looking at this going, maybe one day we'll just get told we can't do something and we can't even take the matter to a court?
First of all, if not normal is the reason for creating this law, there's a lot of people that are not normal, so there's not a very high bar, really. Yeah,
usually they just give them podcasts and then they go
and invite
off in
them
a
on.
corner. Yeah, exactly.
But this particular law only applies to the situation around the mine. So it does apply to Clive Palmer, but it does just send a message, it does create a precedent for anyone that really wants to do business in the WA, particularly because the whole, the litigation that this is trying to prevent is a finding against the state of WA that they've behaved, they've done something wrong to Clive Palmer. They've breached their agreement, and if one of the reasons which makes Australia such an attractive place to do business is because we have the rule of law, because we have courts that mediate contracts, and the fact that the Parliament is willing to pass legislation to get out of litigation and out of the courts processes, then this is extremely risky. It shows that we're not a serious country where we can expect to uphold contracts and uphold laws that make it a safe place and a viable place to do business.
I guess me and James used to be talking about back at the start of the footy season when West Coast were losing that the WA government would require a distraction from all that. It doesn't appear to be the case at the moment. This does appear to be genuine, given that the Eagles have started winning, so that makes it even more unusual.
Dara, your thoughts on the Eagles' turnaround in form?
Don't ask me about anything to do with AFL. As you can see by me being in New South Wales, I'm a recent refugee from New South Wales, and now come back into New South Wales. So.
Well, that was actually what I wanted to ask you. Was that last time you were on the show, you won the trivia, on the quiz, which should not go unremarked on, and you told us that you're in sunny, beautiful northern New South Wales, and you revealed to the public that you lived 10 metres from a pub, which is amazing. Is life still treating you well up there in northern New South Wales, and how's it all going?
It's going pretty good. The pub is still shut. They've got a new owner, so they're doing a little revamp.
They always have to do a revamp, don't they?
Yeah, I know. So the pub is still shut, but still I can leave the house and I can go for a walk on a beach, which is nice. I can, I can do all those sorts of things, which is, it's good. It's good. It's much better than being in Victoria at the minute.
What's the weather like?
It's nice and sunny. It's really hot in the sun, actually.
Yeah, there's no beach within a 5 kilometre radius of here, so I'm fresh out of luck. I've got a question for Pete, which is usually bad manners when we're interviewing Dara, but I feel the situation is warranted. Now, Pete, since you were hit with a bombshell that Dara lives 10 metres from the pub, what was the longest amount of waking time between times that you've thought how good it would be to live where, like, that close to a pub?
It comes into my mind every few minutes. Let's say a few minutes. Imagine that, 10 metres. How good's that? Is it really 10 metres or is that just a figure of speech?
That's slightly a figure of speech. It's across the road, okay? It's across the road, so
20 metres.
It could be more than 10 metres, probably about 20, but yeah.
We might have to ask you to get the measuring tape on measuring tape out for next time you're on the show. So, Dara Macdonald, research fellow here at the Institute of Public Affairs. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks, Dara.
Okay, thank you to Oliver Hartwich and Dara Macdonald. Let's bring the show home with some funny stuff. And actually, this first story, Pete, isn't so much funny as sad because I think we're going to have to retire one of my favourite words in the world. So Bill Shorten this week, he was on Insiders. He was giving a sit-down talk. And let's just say he made a 19-year-old intern of his very proud when he said this.
Or fundamentally, if I can put it in really plain English, Mr. Morrison needs to make sure that he doesn't look like he's just a simp to Donald Trump on this very important issue.
Just explain simp.
No, soft.
We have to retire the word. If Bill Shorten uses a word, it's gone.
So, there's a few things I want to unpack here with you, James. This is one of your favourite words you're saying.
I just love, like, any slightly innocuous statement, just going, simp. Because people have no idea how to react. It's like the equivalent, because you and I love this one, of if someone just slightly disagrees with you, just going, shh, calm down. Yeah. It's like, you weren't even simping or you weren't even being angry, but now that someone said that to you, you become so defensive, and it's just such a beautiful card to play against someone because it's guaranteed to get under someone's skin.
My brother started doing that to me when I was about 9, so yeah, definitely seen that one before. But so you don't like this? I thought I didn't mind it. I was sort of like, I was happy with it.
I think words like simp and maybe WAP for our younger listeners out there, they will be used until they cotton on to people that should not use these words. And I would say that the job title of former leader of the Australian Labor Party would be one of the job titles that can't use those words.
Yeah, and he wants to be Prime Minister as well. So potentially a future Prime Minister has used the word simp. And you could see when he was saying it just before he said it, this little smirk. He's like, I'm going to get in the paper for this. And he said that, ScoMo was a simp to Donald Trump or needs to make sure that he's not. Now, this is another thing I want to raise. Bill Shorten also backed gas over the weekend, saying we need more gas if we're going to have a manufacturing sector. So I'd say Bill's had a good week.
It's so good. It's so good.
He's a simp to ScoMo.
Even on stuff I agree with, it's good.
What a simp. He is a simp to conventional energy. He's a simp to the coal lobby and the gas lobby. I reckon he's had a good week. I liked it.
I will say this. At least it's the proper use of that word, which must have been some nervous moments for him. Just going like, what if this is not the right context in which to use it? So there's some level of credit we should give him for that.
Yeah, it's better than when Kevin Rudd mangled the sauce bottle thing.
Yes, that's for sure.
Don't suck the sauce bottle too hard or whatever he said. And it's better than being... So ScoMo, he said, as you would have heard, that ScoMo's being a simp to Donald Trump. It's better than being a simp to Xi Jinping, which is, of course, what Daniel Andrews does.
That is
political. Took it in a political direction.
That was a moment.
All right, what do we do? Are we moving on?
We should. All right, so... Donald Trump's brother passed away this week, so this is how the Washington Post chose to lead their obituary. Robert Trump, younger brother of President Trump, who filed lawsuit against niece, dies at 71. Now, Peter, this is how the same paper, Washington Post, decided to start their obituary for Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was the leader of Islamic State. Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, austere religious scholar at helm of Islamic State, dies at 48. Sorry. Robert Trump gets mentioned that he sued his niece, and Baghdadi gets mentioned as an austere religious scholar. That's where the Washington Post is at the moment.
Oh, I can't understand why people are turning off from mainstream media, but at least they've chosen to. They've missed the point in both of them, haven't they? You know what I mean? They've stuffed that up by missing the point both times. Like, he filed a lawsuit against his niece is such a random fact to include. It's like, once did his taxes. And then, austere religious scholar. I mean, Baghdadi probably was an austere religious scholar, but that's just not quite the point.
Doesn't quite capture the essence of the man.
It's not the thing, is it? It's not the thing. And Washington Post have forewarned this, James. They said in February this year, it's time to give the elites a bigger say in choosing the president. And then they changed that to something about primaries. So they changed this after about an hour as well, by the way. So they've got a bit of a habit of saying the thing they think and then changing it quickly. They changed the Baghdadi one as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but these people are really serious.
Classic Sims, am I right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Big time. Big time Sims.
Okay, we'll move on to the last article that we want to talk about, which is Robin DiAngelo, the author of White Fragility, the book that tells you how not to be a racist, has a pretty sick new gig lined up. She is going to be charging $20,000 to the University of Connecticut to send 4 dozen top administrators to a 3-day workshop where they will study anti-racism under DiAngelo's tutelage. Pete, she's just got the best job in the world.
I think she has got a great job. Like, she's on a sensational wicket. And they said, further reading in that article, 20 grand, right? Also, 2 grand for travel and hotel, and no phone calls included as part of the contract. If they have to call her to clarify anything or something like that, $320 an hour.
Incredible.
So she's doing well. I think we can complain about this, James, or we can get even. All right, we could easily do something like this. We could just say, look, we were racist and sexist, misogynist, and the reason we like that is not because of ourselves, it's because society pointed us in that direction. We're going to run some seminars, give us some sweet, sweet coin. Like, we can complain about this as much as we want, or we can fill our boots.
No, I'm with you. So I've literally thought we can deliver at half the price, double a buck, because there's 2 of us. We can charge $10,000 for these workshops. I reckon I'm the good cop and you're the bad cop. I'm sort of like, I'll build people up and say, you come in and you say, right, here's where you've all stuffed up. Because you can be quite the intimidating force when you get angry. So you just, I gather them all in a room. I gather the 12 administrators. You immediately kick down a door, like off its hinges. It goes flying. And you're like, right, here's where you've stuffed up. And you spend 3 hours screaming at them. Then you leave. And then I spend 2 days just going like, okay, here are the building blocks. Yeah. And then we walk off 5K each. I reckon it's 50-50 split.
I don't mind it. I reckon we can do it. And I don't see, I'm happy to be the bad cop. I feel like that's less work based on what you've just described to me.
I think so. I think you're the hammer and I'm the sickle in this relationship. It's
always easier to tear things down than build things up, let's be honest. I'm in. Let's do it. Saul can film it. There's a role for Saul in there somewhere.
Yeah, we'll need to figure out like the cost, because I've got it as 5K each. And Saul drives a hard bargain. He's an absolute weapon at the negotiation table.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right, done. All right, that is it for the show this week. Thank you to Oliver Hartwich and Dara Macdonald for those interviews. Thanks for listening to the show. If you are listening through Apple Podcasts, make sure you're leaving us that review. If you have friends and family who'd like the show, we're available on all podcast platforms. So Spotify, YouTube, Pocket Casts, Google Play, you name it, we're there. So they can download the show and listen. Make sure you're checking out the other podcasts we've got going on over here. So we've got the Looking Forward podcast every week. We've got Viral Banter every fortnight. Really good discussion last week. We have stuff you can go back in the chamber and look at. We've got 5 favorite books with Dr. Bella DeBerry and Greg Sheridan. We've got a few episodes on the way, but you can go back and listen to Greg Sheridan talk about his 5 favorite books. You got Australia's Future, but with John Roscombe and Tony Abbott talking about the Australian way of life, how we can protect it through coronavirus. And you can go right back in the vault and go to the Great Books of Literature, which is John Roscombe and Dad talking about their 10 favourite books. So, I mean, I know the rest of Australia is like kind of back to normal-ish, but here in Victoria, we've certainly got nothing to do but sit around and read. So get the reading list sorted with those couple of podcasts. Did I miss any? I don't think I did. The Heretic.
Not to my knowledge.
If you want to listen to the backstory of the Peter Ridd case, then download The Heretic. Cool. See you guys next week.
Become a member of the IPA.
Good save. See you guys next week.
Bye, everyone.